Ever notice how some people always seem to react to big news before it even happens? Like they just know,
Yeah.
Well, get ready, because today's deep dive is going to make you wonder if they've got a direct line to tomorrow's headlines. We're going deep on a research paper that really throws a wrench in how we think about news.
It's kind of crazy when you think about it.
It really is.
You'd think market-moving news would actually, move the market, right? I mean, that's the whole point.
Right.
But get this, back in the 80s, this economist, Richard Roll, found that stock prices didn't actually seem to budge all that much when big news dropped.
So it's like the market already knew what was coming.
Exactly. That's the puzzle. It's like the market had this weird sixth sense.
So what's going on?
Well, our paper, it calls it selective disclosure.
Okay, I've heard that term before. What is it again?
Imagine this. Okay. You're a big time investor, right? And a company gives you a little heads up about their killer earnings, but a day before they tell everyone else.
Insider trading. That's illegal, isn't it?
It wasn't back then. It was totally legal. And it created this system where some people were always ahead of the game.
Okay, so this inside information, it got baked into stock prices before the news was actually news.
Exactly. So on the day of the big announcement, when everyone else was supposed to be freaking out, the market was like, meh, we knew that already.
So it's not really news if some people already know about it, right? It's like a rigged game.
Yeah.
But how did this research even figure that out?
That's the really clever part. So these researchers, they wanted to see if regulations aimed at leveling that playing field actually changed how markets behaved.
Interesting.
So they didn't just look at one stock market, they looked at four. The US, the EU, Japan, and Australia.
4 different markets. That makes sense to compare, I guess.
And here's the best part. Each of those markets dealt with these regulations differently, creating a kind of natural experiment. It's perfect for research, right?
Well, real world comparison.
Right. The US, they were first. They adopted Regulation Fair Disclosure, or RED-FD, back in 2001.
RED-FD, right.
Then the EU, they followed with similar rules, I think, a few years later. But Japan, they took their sweet time. And Australia, they never actually implemented these specific rules.
So we've got our players.
Yeah.
But how do you actually measure something as slippery as market reaction? It's not like you can just look at a chart and...
You're right. You need clever ways to track it. They focus on 2 main things. Stock returns, so how much the price changed, and trading volume, which shows you how much buying and selling was going on.
Okay, so it's not just about if prices move, but when they move.
Right.
And how much activity is swirling around those moves.
You got it. Timing is everything. Now, how do you pinpoint a news day to track those swings? They had to be smart about that too.
I bet, because every day seems like a news day in the financial world.
Tell me about it. First, they used company earnings announcement dates. Those are definitely big news days. Everyone's watching for those.
Yeah, can't argue with that.
But then they also tracked these sudden spikes in media coverage about a company. Think of it like a news earthquake.
A news earthquake. I like that.
And they were measuring the aftershocks.
Interesting. So are you saying that after these regulations came in, the news days, they started to look different? Like those price swings got more intense?
You're on fire today. That's exactly what they found, at least in the US and the EU. There was this huge shift. Before their regulations, news days weren't that different from regular days in terms of market volatility. It's like that insider info we talked about was already baked in, right?
Right. So the market was already reacting before the news even came out, which makes no sense.
Exactly. But after those rules came in, boom. News days became way more volatile, and regular days got calmer. It's like those regulations flipped a switch, Suddenly, news mattered again.
So it means information was being priced in when it should have been, on the actual news day. Wow. What about Japan and Australia, though? Did they see the same thing?
That's the real clincher. They didn't. Japan and Australia, no change whatsoever, which is huge because it means those US and EU shifts, they weren't just part of some global trend or anything. They were directly tied to those regulations aimed at stopping selective disclosure.
Wow, this is really making me think. We've got solid evidence that regulations designed for transparency actually changed how information flows. And not just in some small way, but in a system as massive and complex as the stock market. That's kind of amazing, don't you think?
Absolutely. And you know what's even crazier? This isn't just about Wall Street. This research, it's like a launch pad for thinking about how information flows everywhere.
I see where you're going with this. This is about way more than just finance.
Exactly. Think about it.
This is about power, isn't it?
100%.
Whoever controls the information controls the game.
Exactly. And it's happening everywhere.
So this whole inside scoop thing, it's not just about making a quick buck on the stock market, is it?
Not even close. This is about way more than just finance.
Right? This research is like a warning shot. Makes you wonder what other games are being played with information.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not always about money. Think about politics for a second.
Ooh, yeah. Elections, policies, all that behind-the-scenes maneuvering.
Exactly. Now imagine some well-timed leak, some juicy insider info that sways voters or even changes the course of a major policy decision.
Oh, wow. Now that you mention it, I can totally see that happening. Remember that scandal last year with the...
See? And if it can happen in politics where the stakes are already so high...
It can happen anywhere.
Yeah.
What about the tech world? Those companies are always battling it out. I bet information is key there, too.
It's everything in tech. Imagine knowing which company is about to release a game-changing product or score a major partnership. Talk about an edge.
It'd be like having a crystal ball. Actually, this whole thing even makes me think differently about my own little world. Networking, it's all about who you know, right?
It makes you question that old saying, doesn't it? Is it really just who you know, or is it about what information they're sharing with you? What doors they're opening?
Whoa. It's like everyone else is navigating with a regular map.
Yeah.
And you've got the GPS with all the shortcuts.
Exactly. And that raises a big question. Are some people getting ahead not just because of their skills or their hard work, but because they're plugged into these information networks that the rest of us are completely in the dark about?
It's a bit unsettling, isn't it? Like, how do we even begin to level the playing field?
Well, it's not about becoming cynical or assuming the system is rigged. It's about awareness. This research gives us a framework for spotting these dynamics, even in everyday life.
So it's like becoming more information literate, right? Learning how to read between the lines. But how do we actually do that?
First, never underestimate the power of a good dose of skepticism.
Always a good idea, especially these days.
Right. So when you hear something that seems designed to sway you, especially if it confirms what you already believe,
Confirmation bias. Yeah, we all fall for it.
hit pause for a second. Ask yourself, who benefits from me thinking this way? What's the other side of this story? Whose voice am I not hearing?
Don't just swallow the information whole. Do your own research.
Exactly. And that brings us to our next point. Diversification.
Like your investment portfolio. Don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly. Don't get your news or insights from just one source. Read different publications, listen to experts with different perspectives, and break out of those echo chambers.
Because everyone has an angle, right? Everyone's coming from somewhere.
Exactly. And finally, remember that some of the most valuable insights often pop up in unexpected places.
Ooh, I like that. So we're talking about connecting the dots, being aware of biases, and basically becoming more aware of how information flows around us. But this is a lot to process. What's the bottom line? What can we do with this knowledge in our own lives? That's what I really want to know.
So we've been talking about how information, or really early information, can give you a major advantage in everything from Wall Street to just like navigating your own life. But how do we actually use this knowledge to make smarter choices? Like, what can we actually do differently?
It's all about becoming an information detective,
Yeah,
right? Like,
yeah.
you wouldn't believe a random rumor without doing a little digging first, would you?
Right, you've got to check your sources.
It's the same idea here, but we're applying it to, like, all sorts of information, not just gossip.
So instead of just accepting what we hear, we need to, like, put on our detective hats. What are our first clues? Where do we even begin? Well, timing is always a big one. Whenever you come across some news, a hot stock tip, even just some juicy gossip at work, think about the timing. Ask yourself, who might have known this beforehand,
Okay, so it's like tracing the source of a rumor.
Yeah.
You want to know who was holding the smoking gun before it went off?
Yeah, exactly. And then think about who benefits from this information being kept quiet until now.
Because someone usually does, right?
Usually, yeah. And you might be surprised how often what seems like brand new information has actually been floating around behind the scenes for a while.
Meaning someone else got a head start while we were still in the dark.
Exactly. But look, the good news is once you start thinking this way, you become so much more aware of these dynamics,
It's like a superpower.
Right.
Suddenly you can see the matrix.
Haha, kind of. But it's not about getting paranoid, it's about being empowered. Knowledge is power, but only when you know how to spot it, analyze it, and actually use it to your advantage. And that's what we're talking about here. Leveling the playing field. Not by restricting information, but by becoming smarter about how we consume it.
So it's less about uncovering some massive conspiracy and more about just being savvy about how information shapes everything.
Yeah.
Like from the choices we make to who gets ahead to even just like how we see the world.
100%. It's about cultivating that healthy skepticism, diversifying where you get your information from, and always asking yourself, what am I not being told here and why?
And those questions, they can lead to some seriously insightful answers and probably some better decisions too.
Exactly. In all parts of your life, not just in the stock market, but in your career, your relationships, everything.
It's like we've unlocked this whole new level of understanding how the world works. We've gone from blindly accepting news at face value to being able to spot all the subtle ways information shapes our perceptions or choices. It's pretty amazing.
I think so. It really changes how you see things, doesn't it?
It totally does.
Yeah.
I feel like I need to go back and reevaluate everything I thought I knew. So, next time our listeners hear some news story or get a stock tip or even just hear some juicy gossip, what should they do? What's the takeaway?
Remember what we talked about today. Ask yourself, who knew this first? Who benefits? And always, always ask, what might be missing from this story?
Because there's always more to this story, right?
Always. And those questions, they can help you cut through the noise and make truly informed decisions.
I love it. Channel your inner information detective. Well, on that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive, but this is just the beginning of the conversation, right?
Oh, absolutely. This is something we all need to be thinking about constantly.
So to our listeners, keep those detective hats on and keep diving deep. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.